Hello and welcome to Motor Racing 360, brought to you by Repco. I'm Jess Yates alongside Paul Murray. PM, good to see you.
Lovely to see you.
A big hello and welcome to our regulars, Mark Scaife, James Phelps. Gentlemen, it is time to start the show with Tiregate. This is a big story in Supercars. So we can reveal here, as I'm sure most would have heard this week, that Supercars have lost in the National Court of Appeal. So the category appealed a decision by Motorsport Australia. The stewards chose not to penalise Kai Allen last round in Perth for breaching the minimum tyre pressure rules. Now, what's been really interesting about the way this has all played out on Monday in Melbourne was that we actually don't know why that ruling has been made. So we're expecting a full explanation as to how the appeal has gone down and the reasons behind knocking Supercars back in 14 days. Now, I've got to say I'm pretty shocked by the outcome of this because it feels like this is a very black and white rule. Precedents would show how it's been dealt with in the past, which is to penalise a driver if they breach the minimum tyre pressure. So in all of this argument, there has been mitigating circumstances, and we've got obviously the findings from that initial hearing around the penalty in Perth. But I'm interested for your reactions to the fact that this has been thrown out of the appeals court.
I mean, the idea is we've talked about that it's like when there's a technical issue, then it's binary, right? You're on this side of the line or that side of the line, regardless of whether there is human error or instrument error, well, maybe not instrument error, but the idea about what happens after you've been found to be on the wrong side of it. You would have thought that that would have been where this was resolved, but that's not where it's landed.
Let's cut to the chase. We don't know why they made this ruling because we have to wait 14 days. It's very hard to talk about it and for Supercars to come up with an argument when no reasons were given.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, and you've got to remember that when you go to the appeal process, so the National Court of Appeal is essentially points of law. Yeah. So when you go there, everyone's KC'd up, and you go there and you argue what had come out of the previous stewards' hearing. So I think the chronology of this is important because there was clearly a breach. It's a black and white breach. They were under the minimum tyre pressure. As a consequence of being under the minimum tyre pressure, the stewards found them in breached. They had infringed.
It was acknowledged.
Exactly. However, the stewards, in their discretion, didn't do what they had normally done, which was either exclude you from the race or take your championship points from that race, which that's where you're talking about precedents. When that's happened over the last 4 or 5 years, we've got a complete list of those, that you went through and got all those out. The reality around what's gone on, and these are the instances we were just talking about, but when you make those points, and there has been precedents, you've then gone to a court of appeal where you're actually really only dealing with what was raised at the hearing and what the verdict was, essentially. So you don't actually have a rehearing.
Yeah. And this court of appeal has only been used once before, and it was never intended for Supercars to take on Motorsport Australia. It's set up for drivers and teams to challenge. And the one time was when 888 were disqualified from a race, and that's the only time it's been used. So.
But as significant as it has been, I mean, teams aren't all turning up to Ipswich now thinking that they can go a point of anything.
But it has opened a can of worms. So what was a really black and white ruling has now been clouded in grey, and you can bet your bottom dollar that everyone is going to be looking at what the regulation says and how they might flirt on the edge of it.
Is there a margin of error in that?
Yeah, so Nick Percat and what happened with Nick Percat back in 2021 in Darwin is probably a more similar circumstance to what unfolded for Kai Allen in Perth, right? So their argument was that they had breached the minimum tyre pressure regulation because their tyres were parked in the shade. And that was one of the arguments that Penrite Racing were able to put forward as a mitigating factor in why the tyre pressures weren't where they needed to be. When you look at what transpired in that particular case, I mean, they lost their team's championship points. He wasn't disqualified, but they were the ones that actually flagged it with Supercars on the grid and said, we know that we've breached the rule. How can we fix this? They put new tyres on and they copped a points penalty. So the question that I have is, why wasn't that same ethos applied in this particular instance? And we'll obviously get some more clarity around that once we get the findings from the appeal tribunal. But it puts a bit of grey area over this. So how are Supercars going to deal with this moving forward? Yeah, look, this is a really difficult thing. And what you said at the start of this was basically precedence, but also consistency. Yep. So when you have consistency across those penalties, the other part that we expect
from our judicial system is that the penalty fitting the crime. So when you go through, this document here sets out the recommended penalties, right? So basically the deal between the rule book and the stewards and essentially how the penalties are applied is really explicitly done in exactly here. You go through D17 to tyres. The last point is breach of minimum tyre pressure, and it says in qualifying and race, if you've breached session disqualification for a qualifying session or race disqualification in a race.
Well, but also...
How did you get this document, mate? Because the teams actually don't have it, which is what I found quite, extraordinary. It's something that is given to the stewards, and Supercars have it, and it actually traces back to these amendments being made in 2014 when they came up with some discretion in some areas. They thought they were black and white and that discretion would never be used, but we found one that's black, grey and white. And that's what it's all about going forward, is this document right here. The rules aren't going to be changed. These are going to be changed. So
they're going to be more explicit. They've got to be able to tighten the things up. They've also got to tighten up some definitions, because when we said this whole appeal process was done at points of law, then it's all about the definition. What's the definition of a race? What's the definition of a circuit?
Yeah.
What's the definition of these things? So when you go back and you peel back the layers, then in points of law, Grove have obviously put a very good argument together, and then we're able to substantiate that in the appeals process. So I'm with you, Jess. I thought it was going to be reasonably clear-cut. Yeah. I thought it would be a pretty simple aspect of defining the rule, and Supercars having to uphold the rule in terms of the integrity of the category. But we've been surprised by this for sure.
Look, going forward, there's a simple solution. Motorsport Australia had a meeting with Supercars today. They did talk about amending the penalties. They don't need permission from the teams, but they've gone to the teams. The teams are all united behind this, which is great to see. They're going to amend that rule penalty, obviously, and they're going to look at some. Yeah, but they're going to make it clear. It will be clear cut.
It is clear though, isn't it? Well, I would have thought that's pretty clear.
Even clearer. I don't know the technicalities of it.
Perhaps getting everyone to read.
But hey, let's common sense here. Do you think that the stewards, and it's going to be the same 3 stewards who made the decision last week at Ipswich, would ever take this on again after the controversy?
So this is the very question, isn't it, though? A new precedent has been set. So moving forward, why can't teams go and argue mitigating circumstances around not meeting the required minimum tyre pressures and the accuracy of the sensors? So that's also been part of this argument here, is that 0.4 PSI has been taken into account. So does there need to be more clear-cut regulation around the accuracy of the sensors? And it's not just for minimum tyre pressures, is it for all the sensors on the car that are measuring all sorts of things?
Yeah, look.
This is the can of worms we're talking about.
So the actual manufacturer of the TPMS, the tyre pressure monitoring system, has a tolerance of 0.36 PSI as the tolerance. So it's hard to argue when you're only slightly under 0.1 or 0.2 of PSI and the manufacturer says there's a tolerance of 0.36.
Yeah.
So you've obviously now got to take that window of tolerance into account. But to your point, 23 other cars were over 16 PSI, right?
And they were sitting in the shade too.
And they were in the shade also. Yeah. So you've got to take those mitigating circumstances and say, guys, everyone else, the onus was on everyone else to ensure that they were above the minimum tyre pressure.
The solution is to have no discretion and have mandatory penalties. And we once had that. And the reason that was changed to add some discretion was because there was some, disqualifications and penalties. It just didn't fit the crime. People are sitting in a pub going, that bloke just got cost a win. No way, he should have been done for that. Yeah. Discretion got put in and that opened the can of worms. So it's a technically challenging problem to get it right, and also have an independent body enforcing that and making the ruling on it.
Yeah, look, this is going to be a really hot topic in the pit lane at Queensland Raceway this weekend. I know everyone will have an opinion on it, but I think part of also understanding whether the penalty fits the crime is around the advantage that you gain by that. And so I think there's been some argument that, there was no advantage gained, but there can be an advantage gained by not running enough tyre pressure, correct?
Totally, and it has a inherent effect the longer you run, obviously. So if you start with a lower pressure, you finish that stint of the race or whatever with the lower pressure. That's just the fact of life. So anyway...
are they going to have a review of that done for Queensland Raceway?
It'll be sorted, and the racing's back on, and it's going to be a ripper, and we're going to have Will Brown back fighting with some gear.